Gwen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes. And we have one official big topic that we want to discuss, breakout rooms. How come that I haven't discussed breakout rooms in a podcast episode yet? and you're curating a newsletter about facilitation. And I'm so excited to learn more about that and to learn about your learnings. So hopefully we'll cover both.
Great.
Yeah. And before all of that, and maybe we won't even get to that after the first question, happens sometimes. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
Gosh, it's a great question because I think in my case, it was about 15 years ago, and I was taking an executive education course. There was this international group that came together to learn about social entrepreneurship. And we were put into small groups. And as you do on these executive ed courses, we were analyzing a case study and we had to come up with ideas and solutions. And our conversation was kind of going in circles. And we weren't really getting that far. So I just started asking some questions and tracking responses and connecting themes to what was coming up. And at the end, someone in the group said, thank goodness we've got a facilitator in the group. And it kind of struck me because I'd actually already been facilitating for about 5 years at that point. And I was in the process of learning facilitation, and I was learning facilitation from facilitators who were much more experienced than I was. And so I never dared to call myself a facilitator because I couldn't do what they could do. I just didn't see myself even in the same league as they were. So when this group member said that, I just thought, actually, yeah, you know what? I am a facilitator.
Just won a title.
Thank you for that.
Nice. And yeah, what a wonderful moment to remember indeed. And I can imagine the pride. And I wonder, what was it that you thought back then that the facilitators who deserved the title were doing that you didn't? So what is it that facilitators do?
Yeah, well, these facilitators, I learned my facilitation in large part from an organization called Partners for Youth Empowerment. And these were facilitators who were very versed in group dynamics, and it was all in person back then, in facilitating large groups of people. They were people who were quite comfortable with performing. And excuse me, I'll just cough, pause, carry on. And so they had quite a large kind of presence in audiences. And I realized, it took me a long time to realize, like, my facilitation style was actually quite different to that. My facilitation style was more of a grounded facilitation style, more of a calm kind of supportive presence. And so when I saw these facilitators who were just fabulous, I was so lucky that I learned from people. There's one of my facilitation mentors who's no longer with us, but Charlie Murphy, Peggy Taylor, who was the other co-founder of PI, and just an extraordinary global network of facilitators who were extremely creative in their facilitation and were extraordinarily skilled at creating a safe space for exploration and creating the conditions for people to really examine their limiting beliefs. And for the most part, with that organization, we were working with youth. So with youth, and for the most part, with socially excluded young people. So these were teens who didn't necessarily automatically trust adults, to put it that way, who were not, who hadn't had very positive experiences, group experiences in schools and that kind of thing. And so what these facilitators did, just an extraordinary job on, was they deeply understood where these young people were coming from. And they met these young people where they were, rather than expecting these teenagers to do what they were expecting them to do, which I think is the experience of most young people, most children and young people, of adults kind of having this expectation of what they should be doing. So those two things, creating a really safe space for learning, meeting these young people where they are at, and then designing a process where there was a very gradual process of creating connection and creating bonds amongst the group to be able then to support each other in, and moving through some of these like limiting beliefs and taking creative risks and creating a really safe environment for young people who, for example, had never written a poem before, to recite a poem that they had written themselves in front of their entire peer group.
That's vulnerable.
Yeah.
Is this what you would call a creative risk?
That was yes. Yeah. That was what we would call a creative risk.
I like the term. I've never heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very powerful. And that particular facilitation model is called creative facilitation. So it combines a lot of practices from the arts. So theater, creative writing, song, music, dance and movement in a very accessible way to, and woven into the facilitation process. And so in that process, the facilitator's role, one of the facilitators' role is to encourage people to take creative risks, small creative risks, and then gradually turn up the heat.
Beautiful. And this creates such a strong bond amongst the participants, because when we show our creative selves, we make ourselves vulnerable, the others see it, do the same, and then we're suddenly in the same boat.
Absolutely. Yes.
Beautiful. And it sounds as if many of these practices is what you would also do today with adults, I guess. So creating the container, meeting them where they are, increasing the risk and vulnerability slowly. And I would be curious, because you said that you would consider your facilitation style different, more grounded in presence. So what do you mean by that? Where is the difference?
Yeah. So I just to clarify, a lot of those facilitators were also, not all of them were big performers, and a lot of them came from an arts background. So some of them did have that kind of that experience with performing. And so that came through in having that kind of high energy presence in a group. And others didn't come from the performing background, but they might have come from a creative writing background and combined the facilitation, which is maybe more of that kind of grounded, presence. But I guess what I was kind of referring to also was just on my own. I think at the beginning of my facilitation journey, because those were my reference points, I thought that that's what all facilitation had to be. It had to be that high energy coming in, lots of laughter, lots of people, in just high vibration. And I realized it took me several years to realize that that's one style of facilitation. And there are many styles. In fact, there are probably as many styles of facilitation as there are facilitators.
Maybe even more.
And maybe even more. And it felt like actually a huge relief. And nobody had ever told me, oh, you have to be like this as a facilitator. I just assumed myself that was the case. And then it took me then receiving feedback about my facilitation. And a lot of the feedback was, oh, I really appreciated your, grounded presence. And I was like, oh, I always thought that was something that I kind of had to compensate for,
Mm.
in some other way that didn't necessarily always feel natural to me. So it was a real kind of moment of just saying, accepting, my own personal facilitation style.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think this is maybe the most crucial moment in the profession of a facilitator, or the life career, however you want to call it. Because I think the moment where we accept our own facilitation style, we became calm, we stopped judging ourselves, and hence we allow the group to be in the space without judgment and to be themselves. Because I think if we try to be someone somehow that we are not, it puts this artificial vibe into the group, and then everyone has the impression that they need to perform. And somehow it's funny, when you first said the word performing, I had this kind of itchy feeling, oh, but do we really want to perform as facilitators? But yeah, when you're coming from the arts, it's a different type of performance, instead of putting on a mask and performing a role that is not yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And the performing side of the facilitation to these particular facilitators came very naturally. It was like, it was authentically who they were also.
Yeah.
But performing in a slightly, like you clarified, in a slightly different sense, because I think that's one of the things that I have seen come up again and again, is this kind of idea of the facilitator as a performer, or a instructor as a performer, or a teacher as a performer. And I think it starts, especially with facilitation and performance, I think the two, I think facilitation is fundamentally different than performance. Mm-hmm. So I hear your point there.
Yeah. And still I can see that in combination, if someone is coming from a cultural background, there can be some nuance of performance, but more in the art direction than in terms of performing for the group or performing a role.
Yeah.
And where did this groundness come from? Do you think it's just you accepting your personality and how you work with groups, or is it something that you crafted unconsciously, that this is the person I want to be when I'm with a group?
No, I think it's very much just who I am. I'm a pretty, grounded person sometimes, but I tend to be that kind of energy that is calming rather than, explosive.
Yeah.
And I think, for a long time, I kind of wish that I had some of that more explosive energy. And sometimes in my facilitation, I know that there are times when the group needs and wants more energy coming through. And so that's something that I'm conscious of and aware of, and challenge myself to also move into those kinds of energy states almost. But it's very much that kind of grounded presence, I think, is very much who I am. And so that's why it was such a relief when I realized that, hey, that can be my facilitation style. Yeah. And that's something that I can lean into, rather than always thinking, oh, but I should be doing something differently than what comes naturally.
Yeah. Beautiful. The feeling of I'm good enough. It's funny. For me, it was similar. So I think I only really understood what facilitation was when I actually joined the workshops of Never Done Before. Because before that, I always thought that workshops are these business workshops where you're doing strategies and personas and goal setting and these kind of things. And then suddenly I realized that facilitation is actually about the art and craft of holding space and everything that on the meta level. So I had this huge light bulb moment. And then also was just searching myself in my own signature. And it's a feeling of coming home when you're like, oh, that's enough. I can just do that.
And how would you describe your facilitation style?
Minimalistic. So I basically, those who have been to my workshops, I basically always do the same with a different guiding question on a different topic, but the tools that I'm using are always the same. And I get the group somewhere else each time, usually deep, but I'm not doing much. Very low tech, very minimalistic. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
I think this would be my signature. Nothing fancy. And we'll get to the breakout rooms. But I think now that we've been talking about your journey and who you are as a facilitator, I would like to first cover the newsletter.
Great.
I think to curate a resource that other facilitators appreciate and where you stay up to date with what's going on in the scene. What has inspired you, and how do you find the content for your newsletter?
Great. Well, I'm, conscious that I'm talking to the podcast host who is on her 180th something
90
podcast.
something.
A 90 something. Yeah, I know. It's so my newsletter is called The Quest, and it was really a response to when I had to switch my facilitation practice from in person to online with the pandemic, which so many other people also had to do. I was very intrigued with this whole world of virtual facilitation, because all the facilitation work that we had been doing with this organization, Partners for Youth Empowerment, all over the world, had been in person. And we'd done a lot of remote working as a team, but the training was always in person. And we didn't even, every once in a while we'd be like, oh yeah, we should do some stuff online. Nah, it's never going to be as good as in person. So we'll keep flying people around the world. And so when we switched to virtual facilitation, I was completely fascinated by this whole medium that I had had my blinders on to completely up until the pandemic, and then starting to see what was possible with virtual facilitation. So I started the Quest really as my own exploration into the whole world of virtual facilitation, and wanted to share what I was learning with other people who I knew who were also sharing things with me about what they were learning. So the newsletter became my way of sharing out with other facilitators my journey into virtual facilitation. And so it started just with, very basics of how do you create engagement online. And I look back at my first editions and think, wow, we were really in a different place, almost 2 years ago. And I'm coming up to my 100th edition. And it's got me thinking, about all those milestones of really what have I learned and what have we learned about virtual facilitation, and where do we kind of go from here? But it's been the most incredible journey. And I've just been so amazed at how many people have joined me on that journey. And I get, comments and people writing me after I hit send on the newsletter, and you never know. You're like, hopefully there's something in there that's interesting to somebody else except for me. But if there isn't, oh well, And then people writing back, oh, like I read this edition and I tried this out in my workshop and this made such a huge difference. And, lots of people really trying to figure this thing out.
Mm. So what's been the learning journey? Maybe there was something like a breakthrough, a turning point where suddenly you realized, oh, that's a new normal. Oh, it suddenly feels more comfortable than before.
Funny that you should say that, because I think my aha moment with virtual facilitation was very early. It was actually in my first virtual session that I led, a virtual session that was supposed to be in person, and then because of the pandemic, was switched to an online. And I told the organizers, I said, I don't know how to do online facilitation, so you might want to find somebody else. They're like, no, let's just try and see what we can kind of create. And I was really grateful to the organizers, because they were so open as far as what they were looking for, and they were willing to experiment. They were willing to do things very differently, which was what I was proposing to them. Very experiential, very much this kind of creativity based approach to facilitation. So what was that going to look like on in the virtual space? And it was in that first workshop session with a group of about 30 teacher trainees who are applying to a program. We did all kinds of movement, we did theater games, we did all kinds of stuff, had all kinds of technical glitches, transitions weren't very smooth. I was still getting up to speed with the technology of breakout groups and stuff. And when we came to the end of the workshop, I had literally no idea how things had gone. I thought, people seemed to be participating in the activities, and there was some activity in the chat. And I threw out a question at the end, like, just one word, how are you feeling at the end of this workshop? And very conscious that we were in Spain anyway, we were in lockdown. People hadn't left their homes for several weeks. Their whole lives had just been thrown upside down. These were teachers, on the front lines of everything that was happening. And when the responses started coming through, it was one word of connected, energized, empowered, inspired. And I was used to getting those kinds of responses in the in-person sessions. That was quite normal. But in this online session, it was, for me, seeing the cascade of responses was a real aha moment for me, that it is possible to do deeply transformative and meaningful work online. And I think at that point, I said, I want to learn how to do this, and I want to learn how to do it well, and I want to learn with others as well. Yeah. And that's what kind of gave rise to the newsletter.
And what is it that makes the difference?
I think what makes the difference, this is actually one of the big learnings I think I've had over the course of writing the newsletter, is that really what makes the difference is when you design and lead a virtual session that's specifically designed for the way that we interact online. So there's a lot of in-person practices, some more sound than others, that we transferred online and got kind of so far as a natural response. And what I've learned over the course of leading virtual facilitation sessions, of researching, of all the newsletter episodes, is that it really comes down, we interact differently online than we do in person. And so understanding the specific ways that we don't have the body language, we don't have the spontaneous opportunities to connect with each other. There isn't that kind of like chit chat at the beginning of a workshop that eases people in. You are just all of a sudden on a Zoom screen. Just the physicality of looking at a screen and the tax that has on your brain and your senses, all combine to something that needs to be designed for differently. And so I think what really makes the difference is when facilitators understand that, virtual facilitators, I'm talking about virtual facilitation, and can design and facilitate specifically for that. So just to give you an example, the first 5 minutes of a Zoom call being so critical and crucial for so many different reasons. But a lot of that has to do with this kind of the experience of all of a sudden being on a Zoom screen with a whole bunch of other people. So as a facilitator, how can you make that into, what we would do in person as well, a threshold moment where you bring people in? People are coming from probably hours and hours of Zoom calls already. So they're exhausted. They're, you don't know what's going on in the background. And especially like during the pandemic, so much was going on in the background of the Zoom screen with families and pets and, life going on in the background. So to facilitate an experience where you, from the very, very get-go, help people to feel at ease, help people to start connecting with each other, and crucially, I think, get all the voices in the room from the very get-go, with a chat prompt or some kind of something that sets the stage for engagement.
Yeah. So what is your first 5-minute routine then? Do you have one?
I do, and I'd love to keep like switching it up, because it is a bit of I feel like it's a routine, but it's probably, a routine that's not vastly different than other people. But we'd have, people would come from the waiting room. I like to let everybody in at the same time, rather than kind of, one person comes in and the next and the next. We have everybody come in, there's some music playing, there's a welcome slide. And then very quickly, we go into a first prompt question. The prompt question, if it's a new group that doesn't know each other, it's usually something to the effect of your name, where you're calling in from, and then one more question. That's the question that starts to drop the level of kind of engagement. So it could be something like, something you're celebrating in your life, or it could be, it depends on where you're at with the group. Really, that prompt question, I like to kind of tailor it to where I think the group is at.
Nice. And this would all happen in chat?
Yeah, I mean, I would welcome people into the group. The answers would then go into the chat. And then another thing that I like to do is have everybody turn their mics on and say hello to each other. And it's like everybody is saying hello over each other.
I love that.
And then that's just, it has this effect of literally getting all the voices in the room. And it's an easy thing to do. So at those first 5 minutes, what I'm looking to do is just lower the barriers, get everyone having engaged in the prompt question and turning on their mics. And then it makes it so much more, it sets the stage for engagement for the rest of the session.
Yeah. I've never thought of doing that, that everyone says hello at the same time.
And you can get creative. You can say, say hello to this group in the way that you would say hello to a very good friend.
Yeah.
And, it just kind of gets people a little bit more into a heart connecting space.
Beautiful. And would you ask them to put the video, their camera on, or is this something that happens more subtly?
Yeah, I usually, before a session, I would give people the heads up that it is going to be a session where, we invite people to put their cameras on. Obviously, turning your cameras on facilitates connection a lot. I know that there are some people out there and, course creators and stuff like that who like having cameras on is like a non-negotiable. You have to have your camera on for the session. I tend to be a little less, most people will turn their cameras on. I will usually, as we're kind of going through and setting up the session, kind of share why it's so important to have our cameras on, and that's why we're asking people. And if it's not possible, there's a lot of people who also join, who have joined my sessions they're audio only, and they are participating in the same way that everybody else is. So it's a funny question that of the cameras on, because I think it's often also us as facilitators adjusting ourselves to facilitating a group who might be half cameras on, half audio, and maybe audio and cameras off, but they are there. Yeah. And somehow you have to bring them, along with you.
Yes. And how we deal with this, with what is the narrative that we're putting on people who don't have the cameras on? Because as you say, there are millions of reasons they can be active. And then to what extent is it just our discomfort?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Love that. So what's your relationship with breakout rooms?
I love breakout groups. I feel like that's one of the gifts that Zoom, in the case I mostly use Zoom, like Zoom has given us as virtual groups. The short answer to that is that I love breakout groups. I will try to find opportunities for using them wherever I can. I often realize in feedback from people from virtual sessions, often, the things that they most value are the opportunities to connect with each other in the breakout groups. Although that's a bit hard for us facilitators sometimes to accept. It's the truth. It's no one will ever kind of, complain that there weren't enough slides and there wasn't enough, content, but they will miss.
That's so good. Yes.
When there wasn't enough opportunity to connect with each other. And that's usually done in the breakout groups.
Yeah. No one will ever complain about not enough slides. Thank you. Yes. Brilliant. And still, so I'm 100% with you. I believe that this is where the magic happens. And still, there is this kind of fear, even after 2 years. And I thought that breakout rooms are quite standard. And I'm surprised that there's still many groups or many participants who've never been in a breakout room. Yes.
That also surprises me.
And you're very surprised.
Yeah.
So what's your strategy to decreasing the, let's call it fear or discomfort of participants to join the first breakout room? And because it is very intimate, suddenly someone is as close as rarely they get. Maybe in Spain, they get as close in a conversation, but north of Spain, very rarely.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because I have to, recognize my bias that I love breakout groups. I love this. If I'm a participant in a virtual session, when I go into a breakout group and I'm like waiting to see who's going to come into the breakout group, I'm always like, wow, it's like this surprise. And you're often in breakout groups with people from all over the world. And so I have to admit my bias there, because I know that that's not the case for everybody. Some people do have a aversion to breakout groups because of probably, these kinds of experiences where, all of a sudden you're in a breakout group with somebody. Either you might not know why you're in a breakout group. You might not know what you're supposed to be doing. You might not have reached the level of comfort with the group yet to be, a breakout group of 2 is a very intimate experience, that all said, I certainly have heard from a lot of introverts that they really appreciate a first breakout group, especially when it's just a pair, because that can ease them into then a bigger breakout group and then into, whole group activities. So I think, I think I'm just kind of saying to myself now, there's lots of experiences that people have with these breakout groups, but I think the key to setting up successful and to really getting that magic in the breakout groups is in the setup. It's in the warm up. It's in what comes before the breakout group. So I kind of described the first 5 minutes of my session, because I'm going to then go into activities that require people to participate, to engage, to try new things. But if I haven't set that up properly from the beginning, then it isn't, then there will be resistance, in when it comes time to going into a breakout.
Yeah. And I appreciate you naming the few reasons why they might feel aversion against the breakout room, not knowing why and what to do there. And I think it's one of the most awkward moments when that I recognize even as a participant, suddenly being in a breakout room with this stranger, and like, so what are we supposed to talk about? And we are so used, I think, in the virtual space to receive permission or guidance in what to do that it feels so easy. Oh, okay, I'm supposed to answer this question, I answer this question. But suddenly without guidance, it's like, okay, so what's your name and where are you calling in from? And if you're then not fortunate to be with the other facilitator, but maybe with someone who is more introverted or shy or doesn't know how to ask questions, can be, I wouldn't say traumatic, but a kind of a negative experience suddenly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably an experience that a lot of people have had, unfortunately. So it is, and sometimes like it's not being clear on what you're supposed to do, but sometimes it's also like the facilitators asked me to do this. I actually don't really want to do this. Let's just use this time to talk,
Which is also fine,
yeah, which is also fine. But I think it's the setup, and then it's the setup of the breakout groups. So the clarity. So the setup also being creating that sense of a safe and supportive environment, or a safer and more supportive environment in your virtual group for your participants, so that when the breakout group time comes along, you've done that work already of, creating some kind of a container, and maybe you've gone through guidelines or agreements. People know how to leave a breakout group if they need to, you're in the main space. There's some kind of that kind of setup as well. And then I think the best breakout groups also flow very naturally from what you've just done. So you don't have that sense of like, okay, wait, why are we in this breakout group? You've done an activity and you're, going in to talk about the experience with your breakout group member, and clear instructions and prompts. And what I like to do is copy and paste the instructions into the chat. And I know that you do that too, which I find really, really helpful. And I do that actually a lot in the virtual facilitation. A lot of the prompts and the instructions and any kind of key things, I will copy and paste over into the chat, because I am the first person. If somebody gives me some instructions, I kind of space out for a couple of minutes, come back, I'm like, oh, wait.
What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, I'm that person sometimes. So
yeah. And then there's so much distraction and our mind wanders. So if we don't get this 1 minute, fraction of a minute with the instructions, then better have them in the chat than have participants spending the time in the breakout room discussing what they're supposed to discuss. And you mentioned the ground rules, and you mentioned that participants in a breakout room could come back if they have to. And I find this very interesting, because I think I had a few bad experiences in breakout rooms where either I just didn't get to speak at all, and it feels like being trapped and not seen. So it's a very dismissive kind of experience, I think, for someone to be in a space clearly on camera, being clear that everyone can see you, but apparently the other person doesn't really care.
yeah.
So how do you, And then there are obviously then other situations that could be even worse, where someone feels maybe insulted or threatened. How would you deal with it beforehand to somehow avoid it? And if it happens, so if someone comes back from a breakout group beforehand saying, I cannot stay there because XYZ happened, what do you do?
Yeah. It's a great question. It actually, I have not had that experience. So what I think I would do, what I would think would be the right thing, first of all, that person came back to the main room signals to me that they knew that they could come back to the main room. And so I would always make sure that there was somebody in the main room. If I send people off to breakout groups, I will always make sure that there's somebody in the main room, for that reason. And also if, somebody ends up in a breakout room by themselves and then they come back, they're like, oh, I don't have a pair or something. And then I would definitely, I don't know that it's something that I would address, right there with the whole group. Usually somebody would come back and then you've got like 2 minutes and then the whole group is coming back, but try to understand what happened and then pick it up after the session with the other person who was in the breakout group.
Yeah.
Because I've heard of that happening before. But it has not happened yet in a group that I've been in as a participant or that I've led. So
yeah, because it's tricky that on the one hand, as you say, I say she. On the one hand, the person knows that they can come back to the main session. This means it's possible technically and it's safe, because the person could also just leave the call altogether. So I think being shown this level of trust and confidence already big. And then and then it might depend on how much you have time to really share, to maybe go through the ground rules again.
That's right. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Through those guidelines and agreements that would have already been, put into place and shared.
Yeah. What are your key principles that you always refer to? The three holy principles for your online sessions.
For online sessions. Oh gosh. The holy principles. I would say one is setting up a safer or safe environment where people can, do the work that I need to do as a facilitator to create that safe container for people to participate. Because in online sessions, I think it's very easy to skip some of that important, kind of foundational work, where you say, oh, okay, everybody's coming on at this time. We come on, we do our thing, and then we hop off. But there are ways that don't even need to take a lot of time, even if you're with a group on a one-off, basis, that can help to create that sense of safety. So that would be one of because if you don't have that sense of safety, it's very difficult that you're going to get that engagement from your group members. And the risk is that you may be reinforcing, things that you don't want to be reinforcing, and, negative experiences for people in the online space. So that's one. The next one is creating the conditions for engagement. So a lot of the times I find, like, when facilitators ask, what do I do when I launch a question and all I hear is crickets, total silence, nobody's responding to my question. I feel like the answer to that is everything that you do before. So again, the first 5 minutes and getting all the voices in the room, getting people to start engaging straight away, that will then lead to more engagement throughout the session. And then the third one, it's very difficult to get it to 3. But the third one I would say, just because I see it sometimes skipped, is the closing. So I am a stickler for designing and just having some kind of closing at the end of the experience, because that's another thing that is very, very easy to run out of time. All of a sudden you've got, leave meeting, you've got people dropping off. Yeah. And it really, I feel like it impacts the whole experience in person, but also like just in the virtual space, of having that complete experience, of having that moment at the very end to recap, to reflect on something that you have learned or that you're taking away, and a final opportunity just to, again, turn mics on and say goodbye. Yeah.
Yeah. Good one. Thank you. I'm so sorry to put you on the spot, because I actually thought of the ground rules that you would define with a group. then you made me so curious to hear your general golden rules. I love them. And so thank you for sharing. And would love to come back to the second one, or the challenge that you hear a lot from other facilitators. Nobody answers to my question. So I have the impression that it often comes from either, I think that the question we often ask are wrong. So I think if a question sounds as if we're testing the group, then who wants to be in the spotlight and maybe give a wrong answer in front of the group if, as you say, they haven't established the safety yet and the comfort? Or they expect an answer too quickly and they cannot hold the silence. Because yes, of course you need silence before answering a question, because nobody wants to look like a fool. So give them time to think, or to turn to their neighbor or whatsoever. Yeah. What do you think are the reasons when, or how can we avoid it otherwise?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The thinking time is particularly important, especially like with people who identify as introverts. I can go both ways. I'm kind of an ambivert. So if I put myself in the shoes of a participant and somebody launches a question, I am not always the first person to put my hand up and have all my thoughts already organized. And I do need that time. And I think you're right. It's oftentimes, I think as facilitators, we are expecting an immediate answer, and it's our own discomfort with holding silence and just, giving people a few minutes just to, it can be an awkward silence, and it can also be a necessary silence for people to collect their thoughts. I also think sometimes it's just we ask the wrong question. It's like there's an analogy with tennis. Sometimes you just, you serve the ball and it goes out, and you've got to serve again to see if you can reframe the question slightly in a way that, elicits some kind of a response from people.
Yeah, that resonates more. Yeah, true. The art of asking questions. What do you think is the biggest misunderstanding when using breakout rooms, or the biggest mistake people do when using breakout rooms?
I think one of them is using the wrong size of breakout group for the task or the activity or the question. So you might have an activity where it's actually really meant for, a group of 4 to discuss, and you have a group of 2 or you have a group of 8. So finding the right size for a breakout group. And I like the liberating structures kind of the one, reflection time, 2 pairs, 4, breakout group of 4, and then all. I like that graduated kind of like group size. I know they use it in a very specific way, but I feel like that kind of starting with the individual, going into groups of 2, which is an intimate space, then going into a group of 4, which is more of a group. There might be a question or activity where you need those 4 perspectives rather than just 2. You'll get more of more ideas, more more ideas percolating to the surface with 4, and then to come back to the whole group and do a reflection.
Yeah. Yes, very right. And then if you're asking a more intimate kind of question of getting to know each other and you put them into groups of 4, it doesn't work, because how can you reveal yourself and be that vulnerable in front of 3? Whereas 1-to-1, it's safe because nobody can listen, and it's easier to trust someone and to go there.
Yeah.
Because you said 8, and I would personally never have a breakout group of 8. Can you think of a? Okay, you're shaking your head.
Yeah. Trying to think if I've ever actually been. I would never put people into a breakout group of 8 either, but I'm just trying to think of where that came from. I may have been in a breakout group of 8, like maybe there was a big conference or something like that, and they kind of had these smaller groups. But yeah, I don't think 8 is. I agree with you. It's not.
I've been in breakout groups of 8 as a participant. And it's usually this, either they're 2 having a conversation, everyone else is doing either their audience or checking their emails.
Yeah.
Or there's an or there's one who actually facilitates the conversation.
Yeah.
Or a very, very particular flow of activity where it's tell a story 1 word at a time. Just to make up one where it doesn't really matter how large the group is. But if you have 300 in a Zoom call, maybe a group of 8 is a good group size to do these kind of improv activities.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But otherwise, yeah. Okay, I'm glad. How do you determine the timing of a breakout room?
That's a really great question, because I think that all truth be told is something that I still struggle with, as to how much time is the right amount of time for certain breakout activities. So I would say anything less than 4 minutes, where you have like 2 minutes per person. I've tried that. And everybody always comes back and says, we didn't have enough time. We needed more time. So I think that for me, and the type of things that we do, that would be like the bare minimum, because I think people go in, you introduce yourself, and maybe there's a little bit of chit chat, and then you get into the question. So I think I think it depends also on the intent of the breakout group. So if it's let's go into breakout groups, like what you do in terms of like the turn to your neighbor, just to, it's an opportunity to just chat with another person in the group, and then come back and you feel like you're connected. That's one length of time. If you are going through oftentimes I have breakout groups where I'll have one person, for example, telling a story to the other person. Then the other person is writing down the strengths that they see in the other person as they tell the story, and then sharing those strengths with them. And so there's kind of like a sequence of things, and you need enough time. And I did learn that from Partners for Youth Empowerment. It's an amazing activity. But you need enough time for people to, to tell their stories, and for the other person to reflect back. the danger of, and this is the mistake that I still make, is that I make the breakout groups just slightly too short, so that you don't get the full benefit of having gone into the breakout group, done the sharing, and then come back to the big group. You're kind of, I know I'm guilty of kind of cutting that just a little bit too short. And the problem is, when I do, it really shortchanges my group participants. So it's something that I'm working on.
And it's interesting yes, I hear you. And it's, the time just seems so much longer when you're in the main room, just thinking, okay, 4 minutes is enough to tell a story. And I was just wondering, what's the greater risk for the session as a whole, to have breakout rooms that are too short or too long?
Yeah, I think my initial response to that would be too long. And that's why I err on the side of too short.
Yeah.
Because I always feel like we can kind of continue some of the sharing and the, group debrief but I hear what you're saying. I think that's subconsciously in my mind. I'm also thinking, you don't want, a session where the breakout groups feel like they're too long and people are kind of like, oh gosh, now what do we talk about?
Right? Because it becomes an energy leak.
Yeah.
Suddenly. And I think if it's too short, it's like everyone comes back and they always long to go back, so they feel even more engaged with the group, because there's this piece of their partner that they wanted to know, but they didn't get the chance to. Whereas when it's too long, as you say, it's this, okay, so now what are we talking about? So yeah, so what else do you do? And I really need to go to a bio break or grab a coffee, and then suddenly with this kind of awkward energy, they're coming back in the main room.
Yeah.
And then you have to build it up again.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the other things, about virtual facilitation I'm so conscious of, is that there are so many distractions. So when you lose the momentum, it's very easy for somebody just to start turning, somewhere else, to their email, to their, phone, to whatever it is. And it's very difficult to get it back after that.
Yeah. And that's why I try to avoid at all costs participants to open another tab. Because the moment where the video is gone, it's so easy to get into the rabbit hole, because then you see the other tab, and then you see this kind of red dot with an increasing number with your emails, and another increasing number on LinkedIn, and then there's WhatsApp, and then you're out.
Yeah, then.
And I think once in the rabbit hole, gone. I mean, I'm guilty of that. And maybe it's because I'm so easily distractible that I'm super conscious. Okay, let's avoid all these.
Yeah. No, but that's it.
Tabs.
I mean, we are all super distractible, some more than others. But I think particularly when you're in front of your screen and you do have your everything there, you have your email, you have your LinkedIn, you have your Twitter, you have whatever you have, it's all there on your screen. So we are, as virtual facilitators, battling against a lot of distractions that can very easily, kind of come into play if the momentum isn't there, if people start feeling like I'm losing interest in what's being said or what's being done. So it's the facilitators, this is where the design of the session needs to be such that you are giving people good reasons, to want to stay in the session, to want to do the activities that you're doing. If they don't feel like they are, then it's actually on you, the facilitator.
Good one. So how would you, what's your little hack there in the workshop design?
Well, there's a couple of hacks. One is that I usually will throw out one agreement at the beginning of the session, which is to participate fully. And I give people a couple of lines as to, why participating fully. You'll learn more, the group will learn more. Participating looks different to everyone, but the most important thing is that we hear from you and that, we hear your contributions. And then I have a little, kind of, if you agree to that, just give me a little Zoom reaction or a little wave. And so people kind of take the step in. And it sounds, and this is again, thanks to, facilitators at Partners for Youth Empowerment that had this amazing agreements process where you go through not only like what the agreement is, but kind of like, what's in it for me? What's in it for the, as the participant hears this, it's like, okay, participate fully. Why would I want to do that? But the effect is that it actually gets people into the mindset of participating.
Yeah.
So that's one hack. The other hacks are, you've got to just design a really, worthwhile session that is that people want to be in. And that's usually a session where you have a deep understanding of why people are coming to your session and what they want to get out of it, so that you can design it so that they get out of your session what they've come to get. It sounds very, easy to do, and pretty straightforward, pretty basic. But the number of sessions that I've been to where I'm like, oh, great, I want to go and learn about whatever it is, how to create like a little home studio, just to give an abstract example. And then all of a sudden it's just talking through the whole thing. And I'm, kind of left like, I'm not sure that I'm actually really getting out of what I wanted to get out of it. That happens so often. And so just by paying attention to what exactly it is that you are, the value that you are offering in the session, what people are going to get by coming to your session, and then peppering the session with takeaways and opportunities to interact. So not waiting until the end for a Q&A, but actually, every 3 to 5 minutes, some opportunity to interact. Every, little segment, there's a takeaway.
Yeah, hard work. And I was tempted to ask, and I would still ask, so what makes a workshop fail? Hoping that you just that you don't say, well, if you do just that. So how do you fail to get this interaction, excitement?
Yeah, I think for me, it comes down to kind of three things, and there's a lot of factors in play. As you know, like facilitation is so multi-layered and multifaceted. But I think when I think about, why workshops fail, I think one of the number one reasons is that the purpose isn't clear. So I remember one time, I organized a training with a group of teachers, and I had organized it with the school. This was, before COVID, and we showed up at the workshop, and the teachers had no idea why they were there, because the school hadn't communicated to them. They just told them, oh, they're going off to a training. And it took a long time at the beginning of that workshop to get everyone, kind of on the same page as to, why we were all there for the workshop. So I think that a clear purpose and communicating that purpose, really explicitly in the workshop helps to really, give a clear compass to what's going to happen in the workshop. So that's the purpose. The another thing is when the workshop isn't designed with that specific audience in mind. So as we know, like every group is different. And so many workshops are just these like kind of off the shelf content download to whoever is, it doesn't matter who's on the other end of the screen. And I've been in those kinds of sessions, again and again and again. And I remember this was also before COVID, there was a workshop that was being offered in London when I was living in London. And it was on Dan Pink's book, Drive. Mm-hmm. I was like, this was a long time ago. It was when the book, like, it hadn't been out for very long. And I was like, oh, that would be really neat to go to a workshop. And there was these two guys who had designed a workshop, and they were just going all over the world and delivering exactly the same workshop again and again and again. And it was so clear that they had no idea who was actually in their workshop room that day in London, that they were just delivering. It was just like, I mean, it could have been like recorded.
And let me quickly just zoom into this thing a little bit. So where do you think, how did you recognize? Because I guess they came from the US, and one might think, oh, the US and the UK, maybe the audience is not that different, because in London there are as many foreigners, maybe as multicultural. So how did you know, and what would be the small things that you could do to save that?
So, for example, they didn't ask, in what context are you planning on using the principles of Drive, for example, and just even, get a sense from the group. There was just a one size fits all kind of workshop that was being delivered to us. I was like, gosh, I think if Dan Pink even knew that these guys were doing this kind of, I don't know how they got the license for the workshop, but I think the very smallest thing that you can do, even if you're in a webinar and you don't necessarily have the benefit of knowing your audience before the workshop, you can do things like, for example, this is what I love about virtual facilitation. You can do a quick poll, how does, or in what context do you use these kinds of tools? Or you can do a word cloud, or you can do something in the chat, or you can do something that kind of then reflects back. And then as the facilitator, you pick up on that information. Oh, great. We've got like, a group of teachers who are using it in the classroom. We've got team leaders who are using the skills with their teams, blah, 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 blah. What are the biggest challenges you face when you are, thinking about this topic? What words come up when you're thinking about this topic? Starting to get some information that then you can use and reflect back in the content that you deliver.
Yes. And I wonder whether the worse than not asking is asking, but then not doing anything with the information. So I think if you don't have the capability to then integrate the information you received into your content and give example, oh, great, we have teachers here, so this is how you can apply the principles to your life at school and education, and this is how you apply it to a business owner or a mom. If you don't have that, I think then rather don't ask it. I mean, it might be a failure in both, but at least you don't let your audience hang in there like, oh, you asked me something and now what?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely don't ask and then not do anything with the information. I'm trying to think of a situation where I wouldn't be able to do anything with the information. As a facilitator, of a workshop, if I was doing any kind of workshop and I was working with a group of people, I'd certainly want to have some of that information to be able then to say, to connect it to some of the content points. But
yeah, and funny enough, I would think that this is why we enjoy our job so much, right? Because it's this unpredictable, unexpected input that we get, and oh, now we can play with it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's
Because
the difference. The difference between a lecture and facilitation is that you have that back and forth. It's, multidimensional. It's between you and the group. It's amongst the group members. And you're getting to a point with you're getting to a destination that you wouldn't get to if you weren't that particular facilitator in that particular group of people.
Yeah. It's like a scripted theater play as opposed to improv theater.
Yeah, exactly.
A final question. And we, because we spoke about, and you, this brings us full circle. In your introduction, you spoke about these facilitating transformative moments for your groups. And this was your first learning in your first virtual workshop, if I remember correctly, that you said, this was my learning, that you can do it. You can create these transformational moments. And I would be curious, because in our exploration call, if I remember correctly, we also discussed about facilitating sustainable change for people.
Yeah.
And how can you create that if you're literally always in the same space? So I think in the physical space, when it's about transformation, when it's about change, when it's about breakthrough, we like to take groups to a different space just because there's different inputs and insights. How do you get this part of the spark into the Zoom space, especially when it's maybe a recurrent program where people come back over and over again to change, but they're always kind of stuck in the same place?
Yeah, it's well, this is part of why I named my course, my online facilitation course, Breakthrough Facilitation, because the intent with the course is, and part of my exploration into the world of virtual facilitation was like, how can we go even beyond just engagement? So how do I engage my groups? That's been the question, of the last kind of 2 years. I feel like there's even like a next step to that, which is, let's go beyond engagement and to sparking these moments of breakthrough that lead to transformation. And again, this was the facilitation approach that Partners for Youth Empowerment used and based on kind of like transformative learning theory and experiential education and a lot of these approaches that were getting to the point of having people, question limiting beliefs and open new possibilities. So in broad strokes, it is that, by creating a safe and supportive space, and then having things like, meaningful breakout groups, and reflection time where you are able to uncover these kinds of limiting beliefs and mindsets to then be able to open new possibilities for yourself. That's kind of like the arc of it's quite a common arc in storytelling, in transformative learning, and then I use it also in breakthrough facilitation. But it's I think it's the design of the experience that makes the difference, because you are working within constraints. So I know lots of people who will say that you cannot do the same kind of work online as you can do in person. I think you can do different kinds of work, online and in person. And I think online you can do deeply transformative work. So you're working within different constraints. Like you said, I'm calling in from the same Zoom screen. You're in the same Zoom screen. I can't physically touch you. We're not in this physical same space. I cannot read your body language like I can read your body language in person. But you can design a learning experience where there is that safety and the safe container that's built up front, and then opportunities to be moving in, out of your comfort zone into your stretched zone and reflecting, moving into your stretched zone and reflecting, moving into your, into that stretched zone, and with your virtual group mates, through things like breakout groups, through whole group discussion, be able to have a facilitated discussion with these questions, these probing questions that go into, our values, our beliefs, our desires, to get to a point where that sparks a realization or an aha. So there's one activity that often leads to these kind of aha moments, and it's a very well-known activity. It's the rose, thorn, and bud activity. Which have you used that before?
Yeah.
It's very common. I love that.
Do you want to quickly explain what it is for those who are not familiar with it?
Sure. Yeah, I love this activity because it's an activity that uses a metaphor of a rose for something that's happening in your life. So the rose is something that's in full bloom. The thorn is some kind of prickly challenge. And the bud is something that's full of potential and possibility. And that right there is that arc of transformation in a way. And it's a versatile activity. So you can use it as a warm-up, as a check-in. You can use it as a reflection exercise. I use it in my course, and we go through, in terms of your virtual facilitation, what is your rose? What is your thorn? What is your bud? And it's so powerful because it connects it connects those three elements as part of the same, coming from the same stem. And so often the kind of solution or the aha to your thorn is often found in your rose or in your bud. And what that says about your thorn, and what resources that you may have to break through that prickly challenge. So so it's designing things that create that space for, and it doesn't always happen, and this is the wonderful thing about facilitation, is that you are working in the unknown. You are just because you do that exercise doesn't mean that everyone's going to have all of a sudden this epiphany moment, but you're creating the conditions for those kinds of shifts in beliefs, in mindsets to happen. And that's where I know you've talked a lot before about behavior change. That is where you get, once you have seen that new possibility, it's very difficult then to go back. And neuroscience points to the fact that you actually create new neural pathways that mean that you actually don't go back to the old ways of being. You move forward.
Yeah. Thank you. It's interesting because I used the rose, thorn, bud for feedback, and rarely for self-reflection. So thank you for that. It's an opportunity to play more with it. We've been speaking for almost 1.5 hours. Is there anything that you would have liked to share that we haven't had the chance to speak about?
I think the only thing that I would like to share, what I love about the your podcast and the Never Done Before community is, it's really, these are facilitators who are kind of pushing the edges of what's possible. And in the world of virtual facilitation, I feel like, the playbook is yet to be written.
Mm.
And so I really feel like it's like an exciting space to be in. And I also just, kind of put out I think we get to a point, and certainly, every once in a while I think like, oh yeah, we know quite a bit about, how this whole virtual facilitation thing works. And I feel, and then I realize we are so at the beginning stages. So I guess it's just like a invitation to people to keep experimenting and keep seeing what is possible in this virtual facilitation space, because it's something that's going to be with us now forever. And it's going to require, thoughtful facilitators to really share and connect with each other to see how we can move this forward in a really, intriguing and exciting way.
Yeah, thank you. Amen to that. Especially the more we get used to the virtual facilitation, then we start designing for virtual only and stop thinking of, oh, it was so much better on site. How can we replicate? Similar to what you shared in the beginning, this is one of the biggest mistakes. Instead of thinking, what can we do online that we cannot do on site?
Yes.
And that's where the fun starts. And I love that. The playbook has still to be written. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dum, da, da, dum. It's the end of the podcast jingle.